Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel. It's Friday. It's a beautiful day here in Madeira Beach, Florida. These days and weeks go by so fast. Don't tell me where 45 years of my life have gone. And my dad reminded me yesterday that I'm a month and a half from being 46, and I told him, don't tell me that. Don't remind me, please. Been watching a little bit of the U.S. Open. I told you yesterday that it's taking place close to where I grew up in Pennsylvania. And they had some rain issues. Start, stop. Can't be easy for them. I know that, of course, as an amateur disc golfer, I've been put in that position a couple times. Where you start, and then the lightning shows up, and of course here in Florida that's fairly common. And you have to sit there, and then you have to go play again, and you can't warm up. It's not easy, and if for those guys, I know they're pros, but it has to be difficult for them as well. Maybe that showed up in a few of the scores of some of these pros of how they scored in the first round. I think the players, the golfers who didn't get to play yesterday because of the rain and got to start fresh today, I think they have a little bit of an advantage at this point. We'll have to see what happens. But I'll be watching it. I'm hoping my man Phil Mickelson can wrap up this U.S. Open so he can complete the career Grand Slam. In other news, you haven't heard me talk too much about my other show, my America's Missing podcast show. I mention it maybe a few seconds before I sign off of every show. But I haven't been talking about it much because my co-host, Melissa, as I told you a couple weeks ago, had an apartment fire, and it's taken her a while to get her life back into order. A lot of issues with insurance companies and moving to another place and getting her internet and getting cable, all those things that, as we all know, when you move, especially unexpectedly, those things can be a problem. But we are going to be recording this weekend our next show, and I'm excited about that. And in fact, on the Encore station of Red State Talk Radio, you will hear our first episode that we recorded. It was like 3 weeks ago now. Our first episode in which we talked about the disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley. So I urge you to look for that this weekend on Red State Talk Radio. And you can also find the podcast, that show, America's Missing Podcast with Ed Dentzel and Melissa Bridges. You can also find it at Podomatic and also on iTunes. And I think now that Melissa is situated again, I'm very happy that she's found a place that she likes, that we're going to be able to turn out quite a few of these episodes. And each episode is going to be about an hour long, and they're each going to cover a different disappearance case, whether it's some well-known one or maybe one that people haven't heard about. And I think what's going on as far as Red State Talk Radio goes is that the powers that be at Red State Talk Radio are trying to turn the Encore channel into more of a variety of different shows outside of politics. And so America's Missing Podcast is going to be a contribution to that. So I'll be interested to see how that goes. Of course, the Prime channel that I'm on, that is all the time, is going to be, of course, continue to be devoted to nothing but conservative politics. So there you go. But look for America's Missing Podcast. It's going to be out there a lot more now that my co-host has gotten everything in order. I'm really excited to get back to it. So let's go to the show. I haven't talked about, it's going to go in a little bit different direction to instead of going right back to the Orlando attack. I'm going to get to that eventually. But a friend of mine asked me about what I thought about Brexit. And if you don't know what that is, I forget the actual term for that, but it's Britain exit put together so it becomes Brexit. And it's Britain's exit from the European Union. The people in England are going to be voting whether they want to continue to be a part of the European Union or they are going to get the heck out. And my friend of mine had asked me what I thought about it. And I'll just be honest with you. I've just avoided the topic. It's not... Can I say this in being nice? It just doesn't interest me that much, really. But being that this vote is getting closer and closer and closer, maybe I should at least comment on it. And I have no idea whether anybody else on Red State Talk Radio has talked about it. I have no idea. Although I see it pop up, the topic pop up on websites that I go to for news. My idea about the European Union since it got started in what was that 1999 I've not been very hopeful of it. When you bring together a bunch of countries that have different cultures, they had their own monetary systems, of course the franc and the Deutschmark and the lira and whatever other denominations of currency that they used throughout the years, mainly since World War II. And then you try to put all these countries together. They have different languages. They have different attitudes regarding government, and some are more authoritative, some are more democratic or republic. And they try to get together and they try to hammer out something where they can all work together and they're going to have one currency. If your average person, or I mean, the people that put this together were supposed to be educated people. It's one of those pointy head ideas, I think. I think your average person on the street, if you were to ask them, you know what, I'm going to try to get all these countries together and they're all going to share one currency, even though this country is a lot poorer than this country, your average person would say, doesn't sound to me like that's going to work. But a bunch of pointy heads in Europe thought it would. And I can remember, 10 years ago maybe? Maybe it's a little longer than that. That there was talk out there that the euro, that denomination of currency they created when the European Union came together, was going to just be the greatest thing. It was going to replace the dollar as the currency of choice for all trade in the world. I remember that. I can remember that. Maybe I'm overstating it just a bit, but there was a lot made about the euro and where it was going to go. That didn't happen. And I guess that's why recently when people start talking about that the Chinese currency is going to become the world currency, I also look at that and say that's just not going to happen. It's just not. And recent events in China, I think, show why that is. Because the Chinese are not very trustworthy. They're corrupt. They will manipulate, they'll lie about their economic data, their economic forecasts, what the yuan, isn't that the currency, the yuan that they use? They'll lie all over the place to make things look good. Now, it's a little bit different case getting back to the European Union. I'm not saying anybody was lying about the euro going back to that time. What I'm saying is that there are a lot of obstacles that people seem to ignore regarding the entire European Union. And within the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen those. Greece, Spain, some of these countries that can't manage, what they end up wanting to be is welfare recipients. We'll figure that Germany is going to give us money, and this other France is going to give us money, and then we can just continue to blow it. We continue because each of those countries, they still have their own budgets. They still have their own governments, but they're using the currency that they don't really control. That is a recipe for disaster. And like I said, the European Union just started in 1999, and 10 years later, 12 years later, they're already having problems. And I guess what they were trying to do was they might have looked at us, the United States, and maybe the way they look at the United States is that the 50 states are 50 different countries, and they all have one currency, the American dollar. And you know what? It seems to work over there. Why don't we try too? And they have free trade between states and very little barriers. And the difference is that all of our states, as they were admitted to the Union, going back and forth to the original 13 and then forward, had similar cultures. Of course, the same language helps. Being originally from European countries helps. You know, the people who settled over here, immigrants. And you keep adding these states on one by one, going from 20 to 30 to 40 and then eventually to 50. And it's not like we added in a country that was autonomous, that didn't, I guess the closest you could get to that would have been Hawaii. But even in that case, Americans had a very large presence in Hawaii well before it became a state. In fact, most people forget that when Pearl Harbor got bombed in Hawaii in 1941, Hawaii wasn't even a state yet. Most people don't realize that. Hawaii didn't actually become an official state to the 1950s. So, and of course, Alaska as well. So it's just different. And our way has worked because of that. However, on the other hand, if these 50 states, Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, were all original countries with their own governments, their own currency, their own ideas about what the role of government is, whether it's very authoritative or very conservative, liberal, socialist, just variety from state to state to state. And then somebody came up with the idea, well, you know what, we want all these states to be together, and it's going to be all one currency, and it's going to be free trade between all these states. I think that the United States would have gone the direction of kind of the European Union has, in that worked for a little bit, and then cracks started to show. But what has kept the United States together is that each state has the same history, has kind of the same ancestry. And even people who live in Hawaii and were there when it became a state, or even Alaska, we can bring up Alaska as well, even though those states didn't become states until the 20th century, people in those states, American citizens, can still look at the Declaration of Independence as being the time when the United States began to get become its own freedom, own country, even though their particular state didn't become a state until the 1950s. But with the European Union, I don't think anybody in France says, well, France really wasn't a country until the European Union got started. I mean, it's just not factually true, of course. So there's just not as much allegiance within the European Union as there is in the United States. Not to say that our way is perfect either. Our federal government is totally out of control. But one of the federal government's main jobs, constitutional jobs, is to keep the states together. In fact, we had a war about that called the Civil War. Because we are better together than we are separate. Now, getting back to England, given all of what I've just said, I don't think it would be any surprise to say that I believe that England should leave the European Union. Now, something should be known to make this clear. England never bought into the euro. It continued, even though it was partly, a part of the European Union, it continued to use its own currency, the pound. Whereas I think I mentioned that my brother and his wife, my sister and her husband went to Ireland. What would that have been? Early May, like a month ago. Well, Ireland is part of the European Union. However, Ireland doesn't use its own currency. It's full into the European Union using the euro. So there's even a difference there between countries that aren't connected to Europe. England chose to go one direction in how it was going to treat the European Union, and Ireland went another. Still, I'm going to say that I'm happy that I think England should separate itself and get away as far as it can from the European Union, because my prediction is the European Union is only going to get worse. How that's going to manifest itself, I'm not so sure. I think that there's a lot of different factors there, but there are no arrows pointing up, to use a Pittsburgh Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin saying. His arrows pointed up, that player's arrows pointed down. He says that a lot in his interviews during the football season. The European Union's arrow is not pointed up, it's pointed down. And I think England sees that. And the only reason this, I think, even came up was because of some conservative, what you could call conservative voting blocs in England who have continued to make this argument, having a lot to do with economics, but also having something to do with immigration and all these people coming in from Syria and elsewhere. It's a continuing story over there. And there are conservative voting blocs who want to start to take a little bit more control over who gets into England, because that's kind of been compromised, being partly a part of the European Union. And David Cameron, the Prime Minister, has come out. I would say he wants to exit it, whereas his opponents don't. Now, the funny part about all this, in reading some of this, and like I said, I've had to catch up on all this, and this is just a very general answer to it. But I was reading at National Review. However, there are people on the left in England, and when we talk about the left in England makes the left in the United States look conservative. I just don't know how many of you realize that. But there are lefties in England, part of the Labour Party, and even radical than that, who also want England to leave the European Union simply because, you know what they say? Well, being part of the Union, the European Union has made it harder for us to overthrow capitalism in England. That's true. You can go out and you can find those quotes of lefties in England saying that. So that's kind of funny. I mean, I guess it's darkly humorous, but it's kind of funny. However, I'm no fan of sticking around for something when you don't like it in the first place and you think the whole construction is headed downward. So that's why I would say that Britain needs to get out of it. I don't think it's going to pay too much if it exits the European Union. I think that it'll be, will they suffer a little bit? Yes, in some ways, but I think in other ways they'll benefit from it. I would say for any country, whether it's in Europe or anywhere else, that if you hope to run your economy in the right way, if you free trade, free enterprise, people starting their own businesses, you need to have control over your currency, and you can't leave it up to a bunch of red tape and bureaucracy somewhere else. I think the argument could be made if you get into the data of what's going on in the European Union, that these countries would have been better off had they stayed independent. Don't get me wrong. I understand the idea behind it, kind of like from the pointy head point of view. But those countries, I think they were going to do fine. I think what happened there in the 1990s, it wasn't even a decade after the Berlin Wall fell. All of those Eastern European countries became part of the West again. The borders opened up. Those people, there was an era of good feeling in Europe in the 1990s. And remember, just because the European Union started in 1999, it had been on the chalkboard for several years. It wasn't just like they woke up in 1998 and said, let's do this, and we're going to do it in 1999. This is a long time coming, since the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet bloc countries got their freedom again. What I should say, though, on top of that, is I think that if England leaves, it being one of the richest European countries I don't know where England would be with France and Germany. I mean, I think they're all fairly close together as far as, standard of living. But if you see England leave, I think that a lot of other countries will probably start thinking about it as well. And in fact, my prediction would be that after England, it wouldn't surprise me if some of those former Eastern Bloc countries that tend to be better friends of ours, and they tend to be a little bit more anti-immigrant and a little bit more independent, it wouldn't surprise me if those guys started thinking about leaving as well. Mm-hmm. And it's not hard for me to imagine that, say I live to be 80 years old, let's say that's 35 more years, that the European Union doesn't exist anymore, that these countries, if we can keep this Western civilization together for that long, that is, that these countries just go back to the way they were, that France can start printing francs as it wants, and Germany can start printing Deutschmarks as it wants, and Greece can start controlling its monetary supply. And not to say Greece is going to ever be great, who knows, but they can go back to their own monetary policy in particular and their own ideas of what trade should be from country to country to country. And hopefully they can, work something else. I mean, granted, here in the United States, we have a little bit of that. We do have free trade between states. Commerce can move between states. Maybe you have to pay a toll on a road or something like that. But there is competition between states. Each state can come up with its own tax structure, its own regulatory structure. States, when it comes to gun laws, being that that's been such big news, each state has its own gun laws. And so we have 50 different types of competition going on. However, on other things, states are required to treat their citizens the same in many ways. So we do have competition. It's not, we do not have a homogeneous system here, and we're not supposed to. We just have a core basic principles of what the states are supposed to do, and then they have some leeway on some other things. But that comes from a different point of view. It's a different history in the United States than what they've had in Europe. Even though we had a civil war, and at one time we were split, and southern states, northern states fighting each other, slavery. But even then, all those states still had a common history going back to the founding of this country, and that's probably what was able to eventually bring us all back together although let's say it was perfect. Those countries over there, there's too many people, I think, in those countries who still remember the days of France and Germany and Italy just being themselves. They might lust for those days again. And if those kinds of ideas continue, especially with England leaving, then you're going to see the European Union break up. Nice experiment, had some decent ideas, but just too much to overcome. Just too much. So that's my idea on Brexit. I'm for England leaving because I think overall it's just ended up being not the greatest of ideas. And then you add in the recent immigration problems, not just the economic issues that have popped up, but the immigration fighting back and forth about what the attitude should be. It's a prime time to get out. It really is. So let's move on to something else. Once again, going to leave the Orlando talk till the second part of the show. I don't know if you saw this, but the one of the black boxes, and they're not black, they're orange. One of the black boxes for the Egypt Air crash. Remember that? It seems how quickly if we forget about that, but that's been a month, 3 weeks. Remember that Egypt Air jetliner that was, I forget where it was coming from, but it crashed in the Mediterranean. And there were some ideas that it might have been a bomb on board. Well, they found the wreckage on the Mediterranean seafloor. And one of the boxes has been located. And even before that, they had telemetry that was being broadcast from the plane saying that there was some sort of fire that started somewhere on the plane, and they could watch it spread over a short bit of time. And there seemed to be something wrong with some defrost or something in the cockpit, something like that. And then shortly after that, the plane took a turn and dropped in altitude for a while, and then it totally went off the radar screen. And I don't know if it broke up in flight or it broke up when it hit the water. I've told you I have extensive experience in plane crash investigations. I'm not convinced at this point that this was a terrorist attack. I know that, or a bomb or a missile. I know that, I guess I ended up being wrong in that other crash where that Russian jet crashed in, what was it, Egypt. And it was found allegedly that somebody who works at the airport snuck a bomb on board. Even that, though, there's a lot of conjecture regarding that, even all these months later after that happened. And I can't remember. It seems like yesterday that happened, but I'm going to say it's been, a year ago? 8 months ago? I don't know. But it wouldn't surprise me if this Egypt Air Flight 804 crash was not terrorism. When you see smoke, smoke and fire can incapacitate passengers, the crew, and compromise the control of the plane very quickly. All you have to do is look at something like the ValueJet crash that happened 20 years ago. It was 20 years ago, last month. In fact, that crash happened on the same day that a friend of mine got married. I was in West Virginia going to a wedding when that happened. I remember it like it was yesterday. But in any case, there was a circumstance where a plane took off, and it was not in the air long at all before one of those oxygen canisters started going off, got hot, started burning stuff around it in the cargo hold. In a matter of minutes, that plane was unflyable. Just completely could not remain in the air. That kind of sounds like what happened here with this Egypt Air. It's very easy to believe that if a fast-burning fire, may be caused by some sort of oxygen canister, something that is able to give its own fuel to burn, it wouldn't take much. especially if it happened to be in a sensitive part of the plane near the electronics, something like that. But we'll see. Black box will tell us some stuff, and then they'll start having to pull stuff from the wreckage from the seafloor, and they'll find out. At this point, I'm just not leaning toward terrorist attack. But we'll see. I got to go to the break. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.
The voice of American conservatism. WRS Digital, Red State Talk Radio.
And we are back at the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. Let's revisit the Orlando terrorist attack from this past weekend, because different stories continue to pop up, and the political angle, the gun control / gun rights angle, how different groups in the United States have reacted to this. And I want to start with a couple articles I read regarding gun stores, especially here in Florida, but I think this is happening in various states now where you can own guns as a private citizen and the state doesn't give you too hard of a time. That it seems like a lot of gay people are starting to show up at these gun stores. And in fact, there's a gun store here in Florida that has offered a gun class for free to people in the lesbian, gay, bi, transgendered community. For them to come in, learn about guns, purchase guns, rent them to see if they see if they like them, see if they want to own one. See, these are the types of things to me that are very, very positive. And to be honest about it, this is one of those ways, this should have been done a long time ago. Not because of a shooting. I mean, this is great. Don't get me wrong. This is a great response. I'm glad, just having done the talk a couple days ago, why I think that eventually Democrats will sell out the gay community for socialism and Islam. I made that argument a couple days ago. But we as gun rights people should think like this. What you start to realize, and what I've learned over the last 7-8 months about since I became interested in guns, really, really interested, becoming a gun owner, and learning not just about the gun that I own now, a Glock 19, but about all sorts of different firearms, whether they're pistols or rifles or shotguns, is that, frankly, the people who hate guns in this country don't know anything about them. They don't. You know, I'll admit, I've been pro-gun my whole life, even though I've never been a hunter, never went to the gun range, never owned a gun until February, late January of this year, never fired a real gun until January of this year. Plinked around with BB guns as a kid, but that's about it. I didn't realize how much I didn't know about guns, and still I started taking an interest in guns. I wonder if we as gun rights people can appreciate that enough. Could it be that the reason that more people don't own guns is just because they're just afraid of them for no reason in particular? That they'd own a gun and they'd go to the range and take pride in owning a weapon if they weren't so afraid of them. It's something to think long and hard about, I think, on our side. We are so critical of the other side and being gun control kooks that we have to look at ourselves and say, are we as open as we can be to those particular groups in the United States? Not necessarily gun control people, but different groups who should own guns. I mean, I know that gun stores have been doing women-only classes for a long time. But does it take a shooting like this for gun store owners and gun manufacturers to say, you know what, maybe we should market the lesbian community a little bit harder and the gay community a little bit harder? Maybe we need to do something, offer a free class on getting to know guns or something like that. Instead, I think the way we think is, well, these people, they're just the way they are and they're never going to change. It's going to take a shooting or something for them to change. And granted, it seems like that's happening, but it doesn't have to be that way. Now, it seems that these classes that have popped up within the last 5-6 days, the gun stores that are conducting these classes are finding they're overwhelmingly popular. And it's safe to say, had these gun stores done this 5 years ago and done an advertisement in gay publications, gay websites, hey, we're going to offer some special for the lesbian, gay, bi, transgendered community people to come in, take a gun class, learn about guns, that they wouldn't have got the response that they're getting now. But every little bit helps. Even if only 5 people show up to the class. And as long as they can be mature and aren't there to just harass the instructor, those people are going to walk away from that class with a very positive attitude. And that'll spread. They'll say, you know what, to this class, and I didn't know what it was going to be, but they were offering it for free, and I just wanted to check it out. And you know what? These gun people, they really know what they're talking about. They're not kooks. They aren't violent. They genuinely care about my protection, and they genuinely believe that we as a community, being that we are, they believe, the gay community believes that they're ostracized, that we're so ostracized and bullied and everything, that they really want us to protect ourselves. And I know that since I've become a gun owner, that I don't even think, about guys owning guns. In the last 6 months, what have I talked mostly about? Women owning guns. Because I now understand totally how guns make everybody equal. And that if you choose not to own a gun, what you're really doing is you're choosing to be unequal. And you're choosing to put yourself at risk. So it's been an interesting read the last couple days, reading about these gun stores and how there's been an overwhelming response. In fact, I saw, and there was some place in Hollywood, there are these posters that are popping up in rainbow colors. Of course, the gay pride symbol. And it has that "Don't Tread on Me" snake. You've seen that flag. But the "Don't Tread on Me" snake on a flag that has a rainbow background. And there's a saying on it about guns. Now, of course, a bunch of crazy California liberals find those posters to be outrageous. Because they're all anti-gun kooks. But as I've told you, you don't need to be a statistician to notice that gun rights are spreading in the United States. And I, for one, want those gun rights. I want everybody to exercise their gun rights. Even if I don't agree with those people politically, and I don't get into their lifestyles and their attractions and things like that, that means nothing to me. Every person on this earth has a right to defend himself or herself. And I think as much as we as gun rights people have talked about that, and I'm not saying we do believe it, but we have let certain groups slip through the cracks because I think we just think, well, there's just no getting to these people. It's the same argument I make about Republicans not taking black people seriously enough. We just think that, Well, they vote 90% Democrat every time. There's no use. It's no use talking to them. No use going to some black community event somewhere as a conservative Republican and just talking. Yes, maybe you're going to get some crap. Maybe not. Maybe not. It shouldn't be that we have to wait around for something bad to happen before we extend a hand to these people. Now, what I would also say, though, is the gay community in the United States has to understand that who their true enemy is. The true enemy is not Christians in this country. It's not Buddhists, it's not Jews, it's not atheists. It's a bunch of Muslims who are their enemy, who unfortunately just happen to vote the same way they do. They have to understand who the true enemy is and to take that enemy very seriously. And that they haven't gotten more into guns and defending themselves. They've probably relied too much on their liberal politicians to protect them. Hopefully this Orlando shooting makes them realize that there's no politician that can protect them. They can only protect themselves. No matter what, they may be pro-abortion, they may be environmentalist kooks, they may be socialists and everything else. But when it comes to protection, the only person that can do that is you. Now, on a side note, I'll have you know that how do I want to put this? I happen to believe that when people start owning guns, it opens up a doorway to people becoming more conservative. Not that they're going to become as conservative as I am. But I do believe there is something about taking personal responsibility for one's own protection, that suddenly those neurons start going off in people's heads. Well, yeah, I need to be personally responsible. I can't rely on the government. I'm taking personal responsibility for my protection. Well, maybe I need to start taking personal protection for other things in my life as well. And it could be that owning a gun is a good gateway for some of these people actually to start opening their minds up to other conservative ideas. This is another reason that over the years, maybe these gun types of marketing campaigns and a free class here, a special night there at the gun range could open up so many different avenues. I know that it costs money. It's easy for me to talk because, some of these classes, if they were to make the people pay, some of these classes can be in the, in the $100 range. And so I know that doing free stuff like this might be, doesn't look good towards the bottom line, the financials. But I think it's a long-term fix to an issue we do have in this country, that a lot of people not taking their personal protection seriously enough to the point where they just walk around with their fingers crossed saying, I hope it doesn't happen to me. I should also add that as a gun owner, and I had to make this point within the last few days, is that I'm not looking to be a hero with my gun. I hope that I never have to fire my gun, and cause the death of somebody. I think that mentally I'm ready to do so. I think. Nobody really knows until that happens. But I am going to have to be put in a hero position if other people don't own guns and I'm sitting there somewhere in a restaurant and some terrorist comes in, or just some crazy criminal, and starts shooting up a restaurant and nobody in the place has a gun but me. Those people who don't own those guns are putting me in a position where I'm going to have to act. Why? Because it's going to be tough for me to sit there and watch other people be executed. All right? But when more people own guns, then people don't end up having to be heroes. They just have to protect themselves. And if they protect themselves, that's not being a hero. That's just human nature. And then I don't have to worry about getting out my gun to protect somebody else, because that somebody else already owns a gun, protects himself, herself, and then the situation is over. So I'm just telling that to all of you out there who still aren't thrilled about owning guns. You're afraid of guns. Just don't think it's worth it. They're too expensive. You have to go shoot. The ammunition's too expensive and everything. Yes, there are going to be gun owners who are going to come to protect you should something arise somewhere. In a restaurant, in a gym, at a Starbucks, in a grocery store, if something happens. But I just hope it's not too late. I just hope it's not too late. And I think for all you non-gun owners, you should think long and hard about that. Already the conspiracy theorists are out there regarding this shooting. There's this guy, John, is it Cardillo or Cardillo? I have no idea. Cardillo. He's supposed to be a conservative. Has an article at opinion.injo.com and saying he's a former policeman. He says, looking at it, all the bullets that were shot and the amount of people murdered, there had to have been another shooter. And this guy, I think, he thinks he's doing conservatives a favor by, let me see if I can understand the logic here. Liberals say that a gun that fires, so many hundreds of rounds in that amount of time, whether it's 10 seconds or 3 hours, should not be on the market. And one guy shouldn't be able to have a gun like that. And so in response, this guy is saying, well, it wasn't just one gun that did this. There might have been two guys with separate guns that did this. I'm telling you, this is doing nobody any favors. This guy is saying, well, 49 people died, and there's no way that could have happened if it was just one shooter with one gun. Well, yes, it could have. And the issue is, see, we automatically think that somebody's shot and they die. What could be that because some of these people who died, these 49 people who died, these innocent people, many of them probably died of wounds that could have been survivable had they gotten to a hospital at that time. Can't forget that. 3 hours is a long time, especially when your life is at stake. And if you're hit by a bullet in the wrong place, you can bleed out very quickly. Not all of these people were executed. I mean, I know that I used that word a few times in the last few days to describe it, but that's kind of what it was. And when I say that, I mean people huddled around, a guy going around with a gun just shooting people and killing them. What I don't mean is that every single one of them was shot in the head and died instantly. The way you get a death of a count of 49 people in a situation like this is a lot of people who were hit in the stomach, in a leg, maybe, a femoral artery, or someplace where if the person were to be got shot and brought to the hospital right then, they survive. But you have to wait 3 hours before the police storm in. Those people are going to bleed out and die in 3 hours. That's how that amount. This guy's trying to say nobody could have been that accurate in shooting all these people for all those people to die. Well, the guy wasn't necessarily accurate. All he had to do was hit enough people and then not allow them to get to the hospital. That's different than being an accurate shooter. I should, this is, I know people are going to read this and say, yeah. As it's no different than the Civil War. Why did so many men die in the Civil War? Wasn't because they were all executed. All of them got hit in the head or in the heart and died instantly. Why? A lot of them bled out in the battlefield before they could get any care. Maybe some wounds that would have been treatable otherwise in 19th century medical expertise. A lot of those men died of infection. Yes, because of a bullet wound, a musket ball wound. But it necessarily wasn't the bullet that killed him, it was the infection. It wasn't like every guy that was killed in the Civil War took a shot to the head. You can die from other complications from being shot. Other shots that would otherwise be survivable. This is exactly what happened in Orlando. I don't have any factual information, but you got to believe that's true. There's also another fact to this. I don't hear any of these survivors talking about a second shooter. They talk about a guy. The 3 security guards who took this guy on originally, have they mentioned a second shooter? To my knowledge, no. To my knowledge, no. And originally, maybe there were a couple people who said there was a second shooter. Within the chaos, these people who were running out of there could have thought that one of these security guards with a gun was one of the shooters as well. You just don't know. I've also read that, well, there must have been more than one shooter because wouldn't this bunch of people in here, couldn't they just have rushed the guy? People, I'm telling you, if you've never been to a gun range, now granted, when you go to the gun range, you have to wear the glasses and the earmuffs. But if you're standing outside their gun range where you don't have to you don't have to wear your earmuffs, and the door opens from the regular part of the store into the gun range, and somebody happens to shoot a gun right at that time, you don't really appreciate how loud a gun is. Even a regular handgun like my 9mm, and do you hear one without your earmuffs on? It's horrendously loud. And then to hear that over and over and over again, and then hear people scream on top of that. A person's natural reaction is not to run towards somebody who is doing that. The natural reaction is to run the opposite way, get out, hide, break through a door, break through a window, go into a restroom, something like that. It's not to rush the shooter. I'd also say that let's say 5 people get together and say, hey, let's rush this guy. All we have to do is rush this guy. That's going to work. And the 5 people, men, women, I don't care, start running toward this guy. That's going to work until one of them gets shot. And as soon as that first person goes down, those other 4 are going to say, what the heck are we doing? And they're going to stop running toward the guy. And they're going to run back the other way and hopefully not get shot as they retreat. That's realistic. In fact, there's a point made in the Jack Reacher movie when Tom Cruise has to fight those 5 guys out in the street. He said, it's not really me against 5, it's me against 3, because once I kick this leader's butt, leader's ASS, 2 of you are going to run the other way because you're going to be scared. That's the way real life is. So I just wanted to dispel a couple of those things, those conspiracy theories that are already out there that are kooky. I got to go. You can find my shows at edwarddentzel.com, also at YouTube, Podbean, Podomatic, and SoundCloud. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn. Email me, edwarddentzel@reagan.com, Twitter, Dentzel Domain. Got some more shows coming out, as I mentioned, America's Missing Podcast with my co-host, Melissa Bridges, edwarddentzel.com/book. You know all about that now, the first chapter for free. It's been a pleasure talking to you tonight. I hope you have a great weekend. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.